Alright, we are back with a new video, and today we'll be updating the power rankings for Australian Survivor Blood vs. Water following week 8 or episode 20. And this was a pretty interesting week gameplay wise, although it didn't really change much in terms of the overall power rankings. Now, as usual, I'll be ranking each of the players based on how likely I think it is that they'll win the game from this point. But let's not waste any more time, let's jump right into the list. So, starting with the list at number 9, we have one of the two boosts from this week. We have Jordan, and it's not too surprising to see Jordan go out here. While I was technically part of the majority group as a part of the couples alliance, he was easily the most expendable person in that group, both from a gameplay perspective and from an edit perspective. To where edgically, I felt like his edit has largely dried up in recent weeks. While he has gotten some content, mostly in the pre-merge, I feel like it never really amounted to much. And again, he easily got the least amount of content of the people in the couples alliance. And then gameplay wise, again, I feel like he was the most disposable person there, with Mark and Sam, of course, being a pretty powerful duo in themselves, but even Josh having some allies of his own, and Chrissy and Dave, leaving Jordan sort of on the outs there, with his only connection being to Josh. But even then, we see him obviously get cut this week, despite the Purgatory Alliance being in a position to cut Sam. They obviously didn't want to risk running into Sam's idol, so as a result, they ended up voting at Jordan instead. And like I said, I feel like Jordan was again the most disposable person there. They obviously voted him out to be safe in case Sam decided to play her idol, but obviously they learned afterwards that she didn't even bring it to tribal. And even aside from that, I didn't like Jordan's game in particular. Now, he didn't play that poorly per se. However, he did get into some weird situations, like after the swap when Sophie got really mad at him, even though he was her own ally and had voted to keep her, obviously. And then obviously in this most recent round, where even though he was in the majority for a lot of the game, he never really was in the core of things. And I feel like he never really did much to solidify his position. I feel like a lot of his game was defined by being with Josh, and even then, I feel like he probably would have lost to Josh if he got to the end together. So at the end of the day, it's not the most impressive game in the world, and he's here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we have the other boo from this week, and obviously we have the biggest character of the season going out here. We have Sam, and again, it's sort of crazy to see Sam go out here. Mind you, it's not the most surprising thing in the world, as really these last series of episodes have been largely negative for Sam, where a lot of it has focused on people talking bad about her, blaming her for a lot of the actions that Mark and Sam were doing as a duo. Obviously, she got a lot of flack after blindsiding Jesse and getting his idol as a result, and she really set herself up as the main target there, and the edit wasn't really shying away from that, despite us getting quite a bit of content from her. Like, she was sort of the face of these last couple episodes, constantly hearing her thoughts, constantly hearing about what she was doing, and hearing her perspective on things, only to then be undercut by other people talking about how she's the biggest threat and how she needs to go. So, again, with all that said, I wasn't too surprised to see her go out this week. But if we're looking at her game more generally, I mean, she was pretty good in the pre-merge. I mean, I literally said at the time of the merge that I felt like she had played the best game. She really did a great job at positioning herself in the middle of her tribe, both her starting tribe and her swap tribe. However, really, when we get to the merge, I feel like her game did start to unravel a bit, as I feel like she was largely following Mark's lead in a lot of things, where right off the bat, she literally votes out Khan and Jesse, two of her closest allies, despite none of those moves really benefiting her. Now, obviously, she does get an idol from Jesse, but ultimately, I feel like it really weakened her position. She was getting rid of people that benefited Mark's game more than her own, and leaving her sort of in a vulnerable position there. And on top of that, she did get the bulk of the blame for voting out people like Khan and Jesse, to where people like Jordy were starting to go after her during a lot of that post-merge. And admittedly, I felt like she didn't really do much to really help herself there to get that target off her back. But still, the fact that she made those moves to vote out like Khan and Jesse, I mean, I understand it from the perspective of them furthering their game as a couple between her and Mark. However, I feel like it wasn't really moves designed to help her win the game individually. It feels like it was more so to help both Mark and Sam get to the end, with obviously it benefiting Mark more. And even by the time of her boot, I felt like she probably would have lost a jury vote against Mark. But even against some other people, I feel like if she got to the end against Jordy, Jordy would have won. Even if against Josh, I feel like Josh has a good shot beating her as well. She really didn't serve herself well for the end game, with her getting a lot of the blame and a lot of the heat for a lot of the moves that Mark and Sam were making together, which caused her to be targeted, and with the edit really dunking on her in recent episodes it wasn't too surprising to see her get voted out. Now, I did think there was a possibility that her and Mark could have gotten to the end together, only to have all that resurface to where a lot of the jury is mad at Sam over Mark. But to see her go out here isn't too surprising at the end of the day either. I mean, I like Sam Alon this season, and it was really cool seeing her make a pretty deep run after seeing her on 2017 be a relatively early boot there. But at the end of the day, I recognize why she lost. The edit really undermined her towards the end of things. And I feel like while she played well in the pre-merge and sort of played well in the post-merge, I feel like at the post-merge, she kind of started to play a bit more messily and started to let go of her own allies, which in turn made her the biggest target on the board. So because of that, she's here at number 8. And with that, we are now moving to the 7 people still in the game. And like I said, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think it is that they'll win the game from this point. And there's actually quite a bit of movement from this past week. However, if I'm being perfectly honest, most of this list doesn't really matter at this point, especially now that Sam is out of the game. But at number 7, the person I think is the least likely to win the game from this point is Chrissy. And again, I feel like this might be a bit surprising. I mean, maybe not too surprising in the sense that her edit has largely dried up in recent weeks. I mean, not that she hasn't gotten some content, but I feel like a lot of that is simply due to the fact that there are less people in the game now, meaning that there's more screen time to go around between each of the players. However, if I were looking at her in terms of her edit and game position, I'm not feeling too great about her. Now, she obviously was one of the people that stuck with Mark even after this last vote, and I feel like there's a decent shot that she actually sticks with Mark moving forward, even though she technically was aligned with Josh and David. I feel like that's something that obviously she could resort to. However, I feel like the general sense is that she'll probably stick with Mark. And who knows, maybe she could play a hand in flipping Dave back to their side to hopefully give Mark the numbers moving forward. However, I'm not feeling too great about her at the end of the day. I don't feel like she's really a part of anyone's endgame plans. I don't really see anyone wanting to take her to the end unless she's someone who's viewed as easy to beat. And she's been playing pretty passively during a lot of this post-merge, just start going with the flow for a lot of things. I haven't been really too impressed by her game, and I feel like her edit just hasn't been there, despite her being a relatively big character early on. So because of that, I have her here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and this person moved up because they got a bit more screen time. However, I'm still not feeling great about them. And here we have David. And again, David did get a bit more screen time this episode. Mind you, a lot of it was because of his involvement with the actual game taking place, where obviously in episode 19, he was the main person that flipped to the Purgatory 3 after the advantage came into play that allowed them to get the numbers on that vote. And then in the next episode, we see Mark and Sam sort of reacting to that, getting mad at David. And in turn, later on, we see David sort of stick with the Purgatory 3, wanting to go after Sam. And we even hear his perspective of him like approaching Josh to get him to flip to the plan to vote out Sam. And I thought that was pretty interesting and definitely one of the indicators from that latest episode that Sam probably was going to be blindsided at the end of the day. So that's something going in Dave's corner at least. But at the end of the day, I'm not feeling too great about him winning the game. Like I said, I feel like he only comes up when he's absolutely necessary to the story. And even beyond that, I feel like he isn't seen to be well respected out there. A lot of people easily get mad at him whenever he makes certain moves, as we saw in the most recent week. And I feel like he doesn't really win a jury vote really against anyone, in my personal opinion. Even if it was a final 2 against Chrissy, I feel like Chrissy probably wins. So combined with the lack of an edit, only showing up when he's absolutely necessary, plus the fact that he doesn't seem well respected, doesn't seem to win the game in any scenario, and whenever he does make a move, people seem to react negatively to it. That's a big reason I'm not feeling too great about David. He's here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and we're actually moving on to the first member of the Purgatory 3. And while this person did seem like they're going to be an underdog person at a point, I feel like their edit just hasn't been there. And here we have Shale. And I feel like of the 3 people, Shale has been the least involved gameplay wise, which is a big reason that I have her below the other members in there. I feel like she's just largely there. I mean, obviously KJ got to play the advantage. I'll be talking about that more in a minute. And obviously Jordy is the figurehead of that group. Now I do feel like Shale's probably the least likely to go home first of that group, as despite her being targeted earlier on in the game for being this big threat, I feel like at this point, I feel like there actually is a chance she could get all the way to the final 4, possibly final 3 before me cut there. If not her, then KJ for sure. But I feel like with her not being as involved in the gameplay and her not really having the edit to back it up, I feel like I can't put her too much higher, and she's here at number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4, and we're talking about someone we literally just mentioned. It is KJ, and again, I don't feel like KJ's winning either. However, I feel like she's been at least more integral to the inner workings of the Purgatory 3, at least gameplay wise. Now, a lot of that does come from the fact that she won the advantage at the auction that basically served as the one that George got at the first tribal of Brains versus Brawn, where she gets to automatically send several people back to camp, basically giving 3 people safety without power. And I feel like she used it pretty effectively. Now, mind you, the advantage itself is pretty broken, especially at the final 9, whereby sending 3 people back to camp in a position where you have 3 people coming back to the game from Purgatory, you're essentially giving the Purgatory 3 at least tied numbers, and all they would need to do is flip one more person to ensure that they win out that vote, and they're able to do that. I feel like I can at least commend KJ for using the advantage correctly and sending back 3 people from the majority group, giving them the numbers at the vote. Obviously, they flipped David soon after to send out Jordan. Now, you could question the decision to vote out Jordan versus voting out Sam. But however, I feel like it's largely okay because, for one, they didn't know that Sam didn't actually have the idol at Tribal, that she actually just hid it back at camp. And also, even if you're not taking a shot at Sam, you're at least taking someone from that couples alliance, the majority group. Plus, you're potentially recruiting people that could flip against the real targets later on, and you're keeping around that big target in Sam for a future vote. So I understand why they went for Jordan that round over Sam, even though I understand why people feel like they should have gone after Sam. But obviously, they end up going for Sam anyway. The next round succeeds, so at the end of the day, it does kind of work out for them. So I feel like the Purgatory 3 will be a force for the time being. However, I feel like if Mark is able to get the numbers the next round, then obviously they're going to start being picked off. Now, Jordy's probably the first to go, followed by KJ thereafter. So at the end of the day, I don't feel like KJ's winning the game either. However, I feel like this past week was pretty good for them gameplay wise, and I do have to commend them for at least making the obvious move and using the advantage correctly, even if you can argue the merits of the advantage even being in the game. But at the end of the day, the edit just isn't there for a win. And the gameplay wise, I feel like there is an opportunity for her to be picked off in the next few rounds. So because of that, I can only leave her here at number 4. Now we're moving on to number 3, and we again have a pretty good player in my opinion, but not one I think is going to win. And here we have Josh. And I've said this before, but I feel like Josh has been playing a pretty good game for the most part, and he did get a decent amount of content this week. Now, some of that is circumstantial with him losing Jordan and in turn being a potential target to be flipped. When we see that in episode 20 where the Purgatory 3 are able to approach him, David's able to approach him as well, convinces him to turn on Mark and Sam, or at least Sam at least, as he seems to blame Sam a lot for the vote. And ultimately, he does go along with that new majority in voting out Sam. However, we did see a bit of interesting stuff from him right before the votes were read, where he was trying to get Mark to play one of the idols for Sam, possibly to flush it, but also indicating that he's okay with Sam going. And I thought that was a pretty interesting thing that Josh did, because I feel like that's definitely something that could be used for him to potentially get Mark back on his side later on. So I think there's definitely some merit to it, but it's still interesting how Josh is able to play a relatively strong game at the end of the day. Now, ultimately, I don't think he's going to win. I do think Mark is going to try to flip him back to his side the next vote to try to get back into the numbers. However, I feel like if he's unable to and Josh is a part of the opposition, then Mark will be able to win out, and through that, Josh will become a big threat, especially once Jordy's able to go. And I feel like he will be voted out for being a potential jury threat. And that's the big thing going against Josh, is that I feel like if he were the winner, he would have definitely gotten quite a bit more content moving forward. And I feel like with the game that he's played, he would definitely get jury votes if he gets to the end. I feel like he wins in a number of final 2 or even final 3 scenarios if he were to get to the end, which is why I think he'll probably will be cut before the end at the end of the day. So I can't have him ranked too highly, but I have to commend the game that he's been playing, and he's here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and I'm going to say it straight up, this person is not winning at this point, but they are the biggest character left in the game aside from the number 1 person. We have Jordy, and it's pretty clear at this point that Jordy is the main villain of the season. He is someone being propped up as a pretty compelling character, but ultimately one that's contrasted against the more heroic Mark, one that will be taken out towards the end of the game in my opinion. And I think a lot of that is reflected in his game position. Now, to his credit, he is able to build a solid group around him and the other people returning from Purgatory and KJ and Shale, really build that group. And despite him being a pretty big threat and not winning immunity at either episode this past week, he's able to hold the numbers and ensure that they're able to win out the vote. Now, mind you, a lot of that is due to the advantage in episode 19. I feel like if it wasn't for that advantage, he clearly gets voted out there, so he kind of gets lucky there. And in episode 20, he's able to take advantage of the situation, get Josh on his side to vote out Sam. So you do have to give him some credit for that. However, I feel like even with the Purgatory 3 being a solid group, he's still going to be the biggest threat of the people of that group, to where if Mark is able to win out, then Jordy is going to be seen as a pretty big threat and taken out as a result. Really, I can see him and Josh going out back to back, in my personal opinion. Wouldn't be surprised if that were to happen. However, there's no way this guy is getting to the end either, as I feel like he would at least get some jury votes if he were to get to the end, making me think that he's probably not the winner. I feel like he is being set up as the big villain of the season, one that will be a big force, but is ultimately taken down. So because of that, I have him here at number 2. And now at number 1, it is Mark. And I know this is a running gag at this point where I have Mark at number 1 every week, and at this point I'm not even hiding it. But it's absolutely true at this point. I mean, especially with Sam out of the game. Now, I was already very confident that Mark was going to win over Sam, but with Sam out of the game, it is very clear that Mark is going to win the season at this point. That much is clear. However, the question for me at this point is whether he will be a strong winner, one that is able to do so by flipping Josh and David back to his side to get the numbers, or if he's going to have to rely on his idols and immunity ability to get to the end. Now, he definitely has the ability to idol his way and win his way to the end. He still has 2 idols. I mean, him and Sam were effectively able to make sure that they didn't get flushed out of the game. And we've seen Mark now win 2 individual immunities. And we knew from even before the season that he's pretty strong and quite capable of winning a lot of challenges. It's just a question of whether that is the way he has to take in order to get to the end. As obviously this was a pretty bad week for him gameplay wise. Obviously he gets kind of screwed over by the advantage that made it so that his side would lose out on the vote by sending Jordan out the door. And then obviously the next round he loses Sam, his own partner in the game. And now with him being there, he's a pretty big threat on his own. It's just a question of whether he can get Josh and David back on his side to, again, try to get the numbers together. Because I feel like if he's able to do that and sort of rise way to the end without having to play his idols or having to win challenges, then I still think he's going to be a very strong winner at the end of the day. And I would love to see him being a strong winner. However, if he's in a position to where he's unable to flip them and the Purgatory 3 is able to hold it down, and he's in a position to where he's the underdog and has to win out, obviously he's going to be able to do it at the end of the day. But I feel like at that point, it would start to diminish from his win. So I think that's going to be the big question to see from Mark moving forward. But like I said, obviously bad week for him gameplay wise, but I never really doubted that was a bad week for him edit wise. I mean, in episode 19, even though he didn't really get that much screen time, he had a really good confessional talking about how this is the final stage of the military operation. Once again, connecting back to his military background, we've seen him have those confessionals throughout the season. It's really propped him up, really made him stand out from very early on. Like I said, Jordy is also the villain of the season at this point, pretty clearly, and he's clearly being set up to be the hero this season. There's also that. And I feel like, again, while Sam has been undercut a lot in the edit and people have been talking about going after her, people haven't been saying that about Mark. Now, obviously, that could change now that Sam's out of the game and he's just starting on his own with both the idols in the game. So there's that. But again, I never really had much doubt that Mark was going to come out on top. And I feel like that will be the case moving forward. There is no surprise for me at this point. Mark will be the winner of the season. And because of that, I have him here at number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. And obviously, at this point, we're getting towards the end of Australian Survivor. I believe we have about 2 weeks left. So I think I'm going to do these power rankings again next week and then do a jury scenarios video where I look at the people still in the game after that point and sort of break down how I think the jury votes would break down based on that. I did that for 41 and I'll probably do it again here. So that'll be a lot of fun. Big Brother Canada is in full swing and that has been a crazy season. And I know that the game literally changes faster than I can like record it in these power rankings, but I'm doing my best to keep up with that. Like, so if you like that season, I have videos on that as well. Obviously, Survivor 42 is in full swing at this point, and I'm excited to cover that. That game is sort of wide open at this point. There's a lot of stuff coming in the near future, which I'm pretty excited to cover. Stay tuned for all that. But for now, that is the video. See ya.